Hey guys, we're back with another landscape astrophotography talk, this time on the 6 things I wish I would have known when I started landscape astrophotography. All right, let's kick it off. Number 1, composition matters. This was something I had to learn the hard way early on, and I'm sure most of you may have started this way. You go out 5 minutes from your home, even maybe off your deck, which is one thing I did. Probably the second photo I ever took. I set my tripod up on my deck and shot across the neighbor's house, set an exposure for 60 minutes, f like kind of 8, and ISO 200, something around there. I can't remember exactly, and that photo is long gone. Unfortunately, I looked for it, but I could not find it. And woke up the next morning, and my picture was there. I dehazed it by 100 in Lightroom, and then posted it and said, "This is the best Milky Way photo anyone's ever taken." Which is, I mean, it was true at the time, so yeah, no, not at all. So composition matters in landscape astrophotography. Composition matters in landscape photography. We shoot during the day, so the same should be true at night. The difference is at night, you can't see. So I made the mistake early on of driving around different areas in the dark looking for something to photograph. I didn't have in my mind anything to shoot. Sometimes I would, find a building on the side of the road, and that was the best it got for me. I would find something that was close to the road, and I'd shoot it because I couldn't see beyond, my headlights. And so there were times when I'd even turn into different approaches and just kind of move my headlights around to try and find something to shoot. It's not a really successful way to really kind of improve your astrophotography. You need to find compelling compositions even at night. And so that's why I made the planning for night photography tips, which I'm going to link it here. It was important for me to begin to learn those tools so that I can actually have success in my night photography and begin to plan my compositions, pre-visualize them before going out so that I could have some sort of success in the field. If you don't do that, you run the risk of wasting a lot of your time. I think I wasted about a year and a half driving around looking for things at night, not seeing anything because, again, it's dark outside. The next step in my evolution would have been to look on Google, find different things, drive around, find things, pin them, send them to myself, and then go back at night and shoot them. And so in that case, you take a flashlight around, you shine it around, you kind of find things at night, and it worked much better. Now evolution kind of stage 3, where I'm at now, I pre-visualize a lot of what I'm shooting so that I kind of know where I'm going. I know what to expect when I get there, and then I shoot it. Not so much like that during the daytime, because light changes a lot. At night, you know what you're getting into. You know where the core is. You know where these celestial objects are. Clouds are kind of the only factor you don't know, but the rest of it is pretty well known. So it makes no sense not to plan for your night photography. It's just going to help you in the long run. So number 1, composition matters. Even though it's difficult at night, it makes a difference. And number 2, the galactic core, the big shiny thing you see right here, the summertime galactic core is not the only thing in the night sky. I learned this lesson after 2 years of shooting the night sky, and then, sad but true, I got bored shooting the night sky. And that was because I was so focused on this tiny section of the night sky. I'm glad to say that is not the case now. I get excited about going out and shooting the night sky again just because I've learned that there's so many other things out there to shoot. I don't have to include the same thing in every single photo that I've ever taken at the night sky. It got to be to the point where it felt like I could do this in my sleep. And I lost that connection I had with the land and the night sky that I was going to shoot. So no wonder I felt bored, and I felt like this was a frustrating endeavor. It wasn't something that really enriched my life. And so I would go out, I would put something in front of the same sky that I always shot, and it got boring. So what I did, I decided to shake it up. I went out for the first time in winter, and I found, there are stars in winter. Wow, And there are stars in the north, and there are stars in the south, in the east, and the west. There's stuff everywhere. And so I would just encourage you to head out and explore the night sky, even if it's in your house on Stellarium. Find some really cool things that you could include in your photographs, whether it's different constellations like Orion or the Pleiades, different nebulas. You have the Lagoon Nebula you could shoot is fairly large. North American Nebula is really nice and big. You have Antares and then kind of the Rho complex, that kind of thing. You have a lot of the different areas in the night sky that you can shoot. You can focus in on. You can use telephoto lenses to really hone in on composition, include some of those parts of the night sky, or even you can shoot wide still, but include different sections of the night sky. It could be different arms of the night sky. It doesn't have to be that shiny galactic center that everyone points their camera at. It can be the opposite side of the Milky Way. You can include different processing like this one here. Make it a cooler kind of feel, not necessarily super warm. So I just challenge you to get out and explore different parts of the night sky. Really kind of helps you really appreciate, just how tiny we are. Space is big. It's not just one little sliver of, bright, shiny stars and, dark space dust. It's much, much bigger than that. And even if you just put your camera out and get some stars in your photo, maybe like this one, it's still really, really, really nice. Number 3, the rule of 500 does not work. Now, hear me out. It works fine if you are going to be using your photos strictly in a digital medium. So if you're sharing on Facebook and Instagram, people are looking at your photos, kind of this big on a screen, then the rule of 500 is just bangers. Use it. Abuse it. It's the best. What I would not use the rule of 500 for is if you have a modern camera with a nice big sensor. My D100E has a 36 megapixel sensor. And if you print your work, or if you ever hope to print your work, star trailing is, if you don't mean to put it in your photo, is not attractive. It makes stars look blotchy, and with larger megapixel cameras today, the Rule 500 does create trailing. The Rule 500 was designed years and years ago, actually for film cameras, to help people figure out their exposure. And so it doesn't work with today's modern sensors. And so that's why there's a new rule called the MPF rule. Maybe not new, but it's out for a little bit, but the MPF rule. And so it calculates the exposure time that you need for your shot based on your camera's sensor, the aperture of your lens, and the focal length. And so it takes all those things into consideration, and it gives you a different shutter speed than the Rule 500 will. To give you an example, Rule 500 for 24 millimeters, which is used to be my go-to lens, the 24 millimeter 1.4 Rokinon on my D800E. So Rule 500, if I put that into my shutter speed calculator, which is a free app, then it would spit out a time of 24 seconds. And so I could not go past 24 seconds without seeing trailing. That's Rule 500. My experience was the opposite. If I said 20 seconds is kind of where I would usually kind of set my exposure at, and I zoomed in and I pixel peeped with my D800E, there was trailing every time. And I couldn't figure it out until I came across the MPF rule. And on the same app, Shutter Speed Calculator, which again is free, this is also available on PhotoPills. That same shutter speed calculation, once it took into account my sensor and focal length and the aperture of my lens, it spit out a different calculation of 8 seconds. So I can only go 8 seconds without introducing star trailing in my photos. And based on my experience, that number is accurate. My typical exposure now, not now, the lens is gone, but when I had the lens at 24 millimeters on my D800E, it was 10 seconds, and I couldn't go past that. So it it really limits the amount of time that you can shoot, or have your sensor open, have your lens open or your shutter open to let that light in. And so that's not always the case. Depends where you're pointing your camera. There are a lot of other factors, but basic MPF rule, 8 seconds is kind of all I can do. So that's kind of really what pushed me towards a tracker. Again, that may not be an option for you, but I would encourage you, if you ever plan on printing your work, look up the MPF rule and find out for you kind of what works best for your situation. Again, this is not a rule that works maybe for everybody, but for me, these are the things that I wish I knew when I started astrophotography. So number 3, rule 500 doesn't work. You still get trailing with modern sensors. Number 4, don't max out your ISO. So 2 subpoints with that. Number 1 is ISO and variance. Number 2 is star color. So we'll start with star color. When you max out your exposure and you're bringing in all this information, your shutters, your shutter's open for a long time, your aperture's wide open, and you really bumped your ISO up, which is not really bringing in more light, but for the sake of this video, let's just say it's it's bumping the exposure up afterwards in your camera. So what you're doing when you max out your ISO, say to 6400 or even something even bigger than that, then you're blowing out those stars and you're losing all that color information in the star. So as anyone knows, when you blow highlights out, they're gone. The same goes at night. When you blow out that color in your star, it's gone. It's not there anymore. So ISO is the biggest culprit that I've seen for that, people going too high. So if you want to maintain star color, stars aren't white, they actually have color in them. So if you want to maintain that color, make sure that you don't go crazy with your ISO. Kind of do a test exposure, figure out kind of what works, zoom in, make sure the color is still there, and then go from there. Okay, so subpoint 2, ISO and variance. This is, for the sake of this video, basically it's the point at which it makes no more sense to kind of bump your ISO past. And so that's probably really confusing. Let me explain a little bit. So if I take a photo at ISO 1600, which is the ISO and variance point for my D800E, if I go to ISO 1600 and take a photo, then that's the point at which I can move my exposure up in post-processing and get a better result than if I were to shoot at ISO 3200, 6400, or 12800. So if I were to bump my exposure up with an ISO 1600 image up to the same exposure level as I would get with an ISO 3200 image, that file is going to be cleaner and I'm going to have more dynamic range to work with in an ISO 1600 file as opposed to the ISO 3200 file. And again, with 3200 or 6400, I'm running the risk of losing star color. So never go past the ISO and variance point if your camera is ISO invariant at a certain point, but find out what that is for your camera and your system. Again, for me, it's ISO 1600. It might be different for you. And again, Canon, I'm not sure, has really caught up with their frame, full frame sensors. But do your own research, figure out what point your camera is ISO invariant, and I would recommend never going past that. It makes no sense to. Number 5, infinity focus shifts over time. I used to make this mistake. I would go in and I would focus during the day and I'd shoot, something far away, and then I'd, tape down my focus and I'd mark it, whatever, right at infinity focus, and then I'd go out, 4 hours later at night and I'd use that as my focus point. That didn't work most of the time. My images kind of were okay on digital, but when it came time to, say, even enlarge that or pixel peep, it was bad. There was never really focused. And the reason I figured out for that was that it shifts over time, because the elements in your lens are going to shift when it's, you see a 20 degrees Celsius temperature drop from the day to the night, which is very typical, kind of around here. The elements in your lens are going to move around quite a bit, and so infinity focus also shifts. And so the best thing you can do is to take your camera out at night and do live view focusing. And so that's simply where you turn live view on your camera and you open up your exposure as kind of wide open as you can, and then you find a bright star or a bright light and you zoom in all the way on that light and you begin to kind of turn your focus ring until you make that point as small as you possibly can. And at that point you are in focus, when that is as small as you can make it. And you take a test shot, make sure, zoom in on those, pixel peep, make sure that those stars are in focus. If they're not, again, go back to live view and make those adjustments until you are focused. So there are other methods to focusing at night that I'm not going to get into. They're a little more complicated. You need different things you drop in front of your lens, that kind of thing. But this is easy. It's free for anyone to kind of try and do. And for me, focusing at night improved greatly when I began using live view focusing. And finally, number 6, post-processing. This is a big one. I used to use a lot of dehaze, clarity, contrast in my images. And so the result of that was blown out highlights, crushed blacks, and no midtones. So I would have an image that had, 2 peaks of data, one on the far left and one on the right. So I'd have my star spikes and I'd have no information, kind of my histogram in the middle. And so my midtones were gone. So that's a result of using too much contrast. And the other mistake I would do is just throw a radial blur on the Milky Way core and bump the exposure up or bump my whites up and make it really shiny and a lot of contrast. And so that's not the best way to process your Milky Way images, not by a long shot. Why I use Photoshop, I'm not saying you should. Lightroom is probably okay if you want to do little adjustments, but the reason I use Photoshop is because you can stack adjustments on each other. So I can use 20 or 30 different curve adjustments instead of just one in Lightroom, and I can move slowly the different values in my images to where I want them to be. And so that way I maintain my midtones and I don't blow out my highlights and I don't lose that star color and I don't crush my blacks. So you end up with a nice balanced image with a lot of color and a lot of detail, as opposed to trying to get that detail from just really big adjustments in Lightroom using the dehaze slider, the clarity slider, and different contrast kind of adjustments, whether that's in the tone curve or just the contrast slider, or it's whites up and blacks down. And so those are not really the recommended way to process your Milky Way images. I know there are different tutorials out there that tell you some of this stuff is good. It's really not the best way. You want to maintain midtones in your images. Don't make them too crunchy. Don't make them too contrasty. So that's it. That's the video. Hope you guys found it helpful, useful. If so, let me know by giving me a thumbs up, and we'll catch you guys on the other side. Thanks for watching. Cheers.